Imagine a man who's carried the weight of war and blindness with unwavering grace, stepping into a Tuesday morning with nothing but his cane and a craving for coffee. Harold Vance, a Vietnam veteran, knows every crack in the sidewalk, every chirp of the crosswalk signal, and the quiet respect of a barista's, "Here you go, sir." But today, a single misunderstanding at a busy corner shatters his routine. Electricity crackles, and he hits the ground, betrayed by the city he's walked for years. Feel the sting of that moment, the injustice of a hero unseen. Yet, as the crowd gathers and engines rumble closer, something extraordinary unfolds. A story of dignity reclaimed, of a world pausing to listen. Stay with us, because Harold's walk isn't over, and where it leads will touch your heart. The morning air wrapped Harold Vance in a familiar embrace, laced with the sharp tang of diesel and the faint sweetness of a bakery's early offerings. At 68, he moved through the city with a quiet precision, his white cane tapping the sidewalk in a steady rhythm. Left foot, tap, right foot, pause. Vietnam had stolen his youth, and time had taken his sight. But Harold had learned to navigate the world through sound, scent, and the subtle textures beneath his feet. The uneven crack at the corner of 5th and Adams, the hiss of the 1017 bus braking too sharply, the three crisp chirps of the crosswalk signal before it turned green. These were his guideposts, etched into memory deeper than any map. Harold had never sought help, not when he returned from the war with invisible wounds, not when his vision began to fade years later. On this unremarkable Tuesday, all he wanted was his coffee, black, no sugar, and the familiar walk from the VA clinic to his small apartment. The city thrummed around him, alive with the laughter of children 2 blocks away and the steady pulse of traffic. But Harold's world was measured, deliberate. Inside the coffee shop, the young barista, Tyler, handed him his cup with a quiet, "Here you go, sir," a gesture of respect that felt earned, not performative. It was the kind of acknowledgement Harold cherished, subtle, unspoken, far removed from the hollow chorus of "thank you for your service." At the crosswalk, he stopped as he always did, cane resting lightly against the curb's edge. The signal hadn't sounded yet, and Harold knew the danger of trusting a silent street. Footsteps shuffled nearby, fabric rustled, but he paid them no mind until a voice cut through the morning, sharp, tense, too young to carry true authority. "Sir, you need to step back." Harold tilted his head toward the sound. A police officer, likely fresh from training, his voice taut with inexperience. "I'm waiting for the walk signal," Harold replied, calm and clear, raising his cane just enough to show its white tip. He'd stood at this corner every week for 4 years, his feet tracing the sidewalk's tactile grooves like a second language. The officer didn't respond immediately. Harold heard the scrape of boots, the faint creak of a duty belt. "You're too close to traffic. Step back, please." Harold shifted a half step, his shoe finding the familiar strip that ran parallel to the road. "I'm not in the street," he said, his voice steady, rooted in certainty. "I know where I am." The crosswalk signal chirped once, a single note promising 3 more before it was safe to cross. Harold waited, patient as always, but the officer's voice returned, louder, tinged with irritation. "You're holding up cars. Step back now." A flicker of frustration stirred in Harold's chest, but he kept it buried, his grip tightening slightly on the cane. "I told you," he said, low and even. "I'm blind. I'm not trying to cause trouble. I just need to cross." The air shifted, not from Harold, but from the officer. A rustle of fabric, the soft clink of gear, and then, without warning, a sharp crackle tore through the morning. Electricity surged through Harold's body, a searing jolt that ripped the air from his lungs and sent him crashing to the pavement. His shoulder slammed into the concrete, his cane skittering away, his coffee cup bursting against the ground in a hot bitter spray. The world spun, then contracted to the burn in his muscles and the dull roar in his ears. A woman's scream sliced through the fog, raw and piercing. Another voice followed, male, thick with outrage. "He said he was blind. What the hell are you doing?" Footsteps rushed closer, but Harold remained still, not from pain, but from instinct. He'd learned in chaos to wait, to avoid the pity that rushed in when you spoke too soon. His palm pressed against the warm, gritty pavement, anchoring him as the crowd's voices swelled, angry murmurs, the click of phone cameras, the officer's uneven breaths nearby. His ribs throbbed, his shoulder burned, but Harold listened, waiting for the noise to settle before he moved. The officer paced, his boots scuffing the sidewalk, his silence heavy with the unease of being seen. A woman's voice broke through again, trembling with fury. "He told you he was blind. Didn't you hear him?" She sounded young, perhaps in her early 30s, close enough for Harold to feel her presence, her anger a quiet shield. Another voice, deeper, added, "I got it all on video, man." Harold shifted, bracing himself on his elbow. The taser wires tugged at his coat, a faint reminder of the violation, but he ignored them. "I'm fine," he rasped, his voice rough but resolute. "Don't touch me." The crowd hesitated, some stepping back, others holding their breath. A soft rustle came from his left, and the same woman's voice, gentler now, said, "Your cane's right here." The smooth handle pressed into his palm, and Harold's fingers closed around it, reclaiming a piece of his dignity. "Thank you," he murmured, barely audible. He rose slowly, deliberately, every movement a quiet defiance. No one reached for him, and no one needed to. The crowd watched, some still filming, others lowering their phones, their faces flushed with shame. The officer spoke at last, his voice tight, defensive. "Sir, you failed to comply with a verbal command." Harold turned his head just enough to face the sound, his expression unyielding. "I told you I was blind," he said, his words flat and unanswerable. The officer's radio crackled. "Unit 12, do you copy? What's your status?" A click, then a hurried response. "Yeah, I copy. Situation's under control. Civilians up, requesting transport and backup." Civilian. The word landed like a dismissal, reducing Harold to a faceless entry in a report. Harold said nothing, adjusting his cane and stepping back toward the curb. His left leg dragged slightly, the taser's aftershock lingering in his muscles. The woman stayed close, not hovering but present, her voice soft with worry. "You sure you're okay?" Harold gave a faint nod, his jaw clenched. "I've had worse," he said, his voice carrying the weight of a lifetime. "Much worse." Then, beneath the crowd's murmur, a new sound rose, a low, steady thrum vibrating through the asphalt. Most wouldn't have noticed, but Harold did. He'd heard it before in distant lands under heavier skies. It was the sound of heavy machinery, of tires too thick for city streets, of power moving with intent. He tilted his head, listening, as the city seemed to pause, waiting for what came next. The low rumble of diesel engines sliced through the morning. Not a single truck, but a procession, heavy and purposeful. The woman in scrubs, standing just a few feet from Harold, caught it first, her brow creasing as she turned toward the sound. "What's that?" she murmured, her voice a mix of curiosity and unease. Heads in the crowd turned in sync, drawn to the far end of the block. Phones that had been trained on Harold, sprawled moments ago at the crosswalk, now shifted to capture the approaching vehicles. A whisper passed through the onlookers. "That's not police." Then it emerged, a green military truck, boxy and resolute, an American flag bold on its door. Wide tires rolled through the intersection, ignoring the traffic lights with a quiet authority that needed no sirens. A second truck followed, then a third. The crowd stepped back, not from fear, but from something deeper, a blend of reverence and confusion. The young officer who had tased Harold stood rigid, his hand nowhere near his radio, his jaw clenched as he watched the convoy halt just feet from the crosswalk. Brakes hissed, a door creaked open, and boots hit the pavement with a deliberate thud. Harold, standing where he'd been helped up, turned slightly toward the sound, his blind eyes unseeing but his senses sharp. 3 measured steps approached, and a calm voice cut through. "Sergeant Harold Vance." Harold didn't smile, but his shoulders shifted, acknowledging the speaker. "That's me," he said, his voice steady, carrying the weight of years. The soldier, mid-40s, spoke with a clipped tone that hinted at a man who read situations before speaking. His authority didn't need volume. It came from history, from precision, from the way other soldiers straightened when he spoke. Harold gave a small nod. "I'm here," he said. "I thought so," the soldier replied. "We were 10 blocks out when the call came. Didn't believe it until the second video hit." Harold didn't ask about the video. He didn't need to. Doors on the second truck opened, and two more soldiers stepped out, alert but not aggressive. They didn't approach Harold or the officer, just stood, as if the street now answered to something older than city laws. The crowd across the intersection fell silent. Phones stayed raised, but voices hushed. A boy gripped his mother's hand, eyes wide. An older couple stood shoulder to shoulder, watching without blinking. The officer, still rooted where he'd fired the taser, looked unsteady, 1 foot back, unsure whether to advance or retreat. His mouth opened, but no words came. His hand hovered near his belt, far from the taser. The soldier ignored him, focusing on Harold. "Sir," he said, his tone softening with respect, "would you allow us to escort you off the street?" "I'm fine," Harold said, steady but not dismissive. "Appreciate the offer." The soldier nodded. "Understood." He turned to his men, voice low. "Hold position." 3 words, no dramatics, and the soldier stayed put. The woman in scrubs who had retrieved Harold's cane stood nearby, arms crossed tightly. Her earlier trembling was gone. She wasn't angry now, just still, watching intently. Harold adjusted his coat, straightening with a flicker of pride. "You want to tell me what unit you're with?" he asked, casual but weighted. "19th Infantry, sir, Fort Lewis," the soldier answered. "You active 32 years and still standing?" Harold nodded, satisfied. "Then I trust you know what you're doing." The soldier's lips curved in the faintest smile. "Yes, sir." It wasn't loud, but the air shifted. Authority had changed hands, felt by all. A man in the crowd lowered his phone, whispering, "He's one of them." A younger voice replied, "Yeah," and that cop tased him like he was nobody. The officer found his voice too loud in the quiet. "I didn't know who he was." Harold turned toward him, slow, not aggressive. "You didn't need to know," he said, calm, no bitterness. "You just needed to listen." The words hit hard, their simplicity a rebuke. The officer's shoulders sagged, exposed. Harold stepped toward the curb, legs aching from the taser. His cane tapped lightly, unhurried. The soldier stepped aside, not clearing a path but acknowledging him. No salutes. It wasn't that kind of moment. It was deeper. By the time Harold reached the sidewalk, city sounds returned faintly. Car horns, wires humming, a distant dog barking. But the block stayed hushed. The soldier glanced at Harold. "Anything you need from us, sir?" "Not today," Harold said. "Copy that." The convoy lingered, claiming space without blocking traffic. 15 minutes later, a dark SUV pulled up behind the third truck, its engine a low hum, no lights or sirens. A woman, late 50s, stepped out, her gray blazer crisp, hair pinned neatly. She nodded to the soldiers, who nodded back. Her heels clicked softly as she approached Harold, now seated on a bench outside the bakery, cane in one hand, water bottle in the other. She stopped, folded her hands, and waited. Harold tilted his head, sensing her. "You're not from the city," he said. "No, sir," she replied. "Washington, Department of Veterans Affairs." "That's a long way for a mess like this." "We were nearby," she said, "but this isn't a mess, not anymore." A beat of silence passed, heavy with meaning. The officer across the street stood pale, diminished. The woman nodded to the last soldier, who stepped forward with a dark blue cloth bundle and placed it on Harold's lap. Harold's fingers rested on it. "What is it?" he asked. "A citation," she said softly, "for a mission you were never officially part of, until today." Harold's fingers traced the cloth, his expression unreadable but heavy with decades of memory. The air held a quiet weight that afternoon, the kind that settles over a small hush when something real unfolds. The crowd scattered along the sidewalk didn't erupt into cheers or applause. Instead, they leaned closer, their murmurs fading, their phones slipping back into pockets. This wasn't a moment for capturing or sharing. It was for witnessing. A woman from the VA, her voice steady but warm, spoke to the man seated on the bench. "Sergeant Vance," she said, you saved lives long ago in places most of us will never see. And when you returned, all you asked for was to cross this street in peace." Harold Vance, his sight long gone but his presence sharp, tilted his head slightly. A faint smile curved his lips, not from joy, but from the irony of it all. "You'd be surprised how hard that's been lately," he said, his voice low, carrying the texture of a life shaped by resilience. The woman nodded, her eyes softening. "I saw what happened. Soon the whole country will too." Harold exhaled, a sound caught somewhere between amusement and exhaustion. Not quite a laugh, not quite a sigh. He gestured vaguely toward where the young officer had been earlier. "They gonna fire him?" he asked, his tone more curious than vengeful. "We don't decide that," she replied carefully. "But the footage from today, it's going to be seen far beyond his precinct." Harold gave a single nod, his fingers resting lightly on the cane across his lap. "I don't want speeches. No plaques." His words were firm, but not harsh. The woman studied him for a long moment, her expression thoughtful. Then gently she asked, "Would you accept a sign?" Harold's brow furrowed. "A sign?" She turned toward the bakery wall where a small crew had been working quietly, their tools clinking softly in the background. A ladder leaned against the brick, a wrench glinted in the sunlight, and there, just above eye level, was a new street sign, Vance Crossing. The words were simple, etched in clean white letters on a green background, dedicated to Sergeant Harold Vance, U.S. Army, 19th Infantry. For the quiet ones who carry the heavy things. Harold's fingers tightened ever so slightly around his cane's handle, the only sign of the emotion stirring beneath his calm exterior. The woman stepped back, giving him space to take it in. Across the street, the young officer approached, his steps hesitant, each one heavier than the last. He stopped a few feet from the bench, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sir," he said, "I did not know who you were." Harold turned his head toward the sound, his expression unreadable, like a still lake hiding depths below. "You didn't need to know," he said evenly. "You just needed to listen." The officer's mouth opened, but no words followed. He nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement, and stepped back. The air between them hung heavy, thick with unspoken truth, like smoke that lingers long after the fire has gone out. A soft breeze swept through the street, carrying the faint hum of the city. Down the block, a group of middle schoolers pressed against the chain-link fence near their school, watching in silence. One boy, no older than 12, raised his hand in a quiet salute. Harold didn't see it, but he felt the shift in the air. He lifted his chin slightly, a small gesture that carried the weight of dignity earned through years of unseen battles. The military trucks parked along the curb didn't pull away immediately. Their engines idled softly, soldiers standing at ease in the early afternoon light. No one gave an order to linger. They simply stayed, as if the moment demanded it. Harold remained on the bench, his fingers loosely curled around his cane. The water bottle beside him was nearly empty, its label half peeled from where his thumb had worked at it absent-mindedly. The VA woman stood nearby, her arms crossed gently, her gaze fixed on the new sign. It wasn't ornate, but it didn't need to be. Its power came from what it meant, not how it looked. A few bystanders lingered across the street, their phones now tucked away. The story had been told not in viral clips or hashtags, but in the quiet truth of the moment. The officer had slipped away, pulled aside by another official, perhaps to write a report or to grapple with the weight of his actions. Harold didn't ask where he'd gone. He didn't need to know. Behind him, a flag was lowered to half-staff at the tire shop down the block. The mechanic, a man with grease-stained hands, hadn't been asked to do it. He just did, his own quiet tribute to a man who carried more than most would ever understand. Harold stood slowly, his knees protesting, his back stiff from years of wear. A soldier from the 19th Infantry stepped forward, offering his elbow without a word. Harold took it, not out of necessity, but out of a shared understanding, a silent agreement that dignity sometimes looks like two people moving together through the world. They crossed back to the sidewalk where it had all begun, the same curb, the same crossing, but transformed. Harold tapped his cane once, then twice, testing the ground. The street was clear now, no horns blaring, no voices shouting, no orders barked from across the lane. Just open space and the faint pulse of a city that had finally paused to listen. The woman in scrubs appeared at the corner, a paper bag in one hand, a steaming coffee in the other. Black, no sugar, she said, a small smile tugging at her lips. Harold nodded, a flicker of warmth in his expression. You remembered. Hard to forget a man like you, she replied, her voice soft but sure. He took the cup, sipped, then winced at the heat. Still too hot, he muttered, a faint smile breaking through. Perfect. They stood together for a moment, facing the street, neither needing to fill the silence. After a pause, she asked, How long were you in? Harold's gaze, though sightless, seemed to drift somewhere far off. Long enough, he said, long enough to come home and wonder if anyone would ever see me. She didn't reply, and she didn't need to. He took another sip of the coffee, then turned his head slightly toward the sign. That's not what matters, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The sign, the trucks, the crowd. She tilted her head, puzzled. Then what does? Harold tapped his cane once against the pavement, the sound sharp and deliberate. I got to finish my walk. It wasn't about medals or justice or recognition. It was about a Tuesday, a simple, ordinary day that he'd earned the right to claim. And on this Tuesday, for the first time in a long while, he did.